The number on my phone screen was my own. For a long, silent moment, I just stared at it. The familiar digits arranged in a sequence that felt like a part of my own DNA. My thumb hovered over the green icon, a tremor starting in my hand that had nothing to do with the evening chill seeping through the kitchen window. It was absurd, a glitch, a telemarketer using some new, obnoxious spoofing software. That had to be it. I pressed the button, my ear cold against the glass of the screen. Silence, then a breath. A soft, feminine breath that sounded unnervingly like the ones I hear in my own ears when I'm trying to calm myself down. "Hello?" I said, my voice tight. The sound that came back was a distorted echo of my own voice, filtered through the strange, tinny warble of a bad connection, but unmistakably mine. It was like listening to a recording of myself, but a version that had lived a slightly different, harder life. The cadence was right, the pitch was right, but there was an undercurrent of something cold and hollow that I didn't recognize. "Clara," the voice said, and the sound of my own name spoken by my own voice sent a jolt of ice through my veins. "Don't go home. Turn the car around and go to a hotel. Don't go back to the house." The line clicked dead. I stood frozen in the middle of my kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone, the scent of roasted chicken from the oven, a smell that usually meant comfort and the end of a long day, suddenly seemed cloying and sinister. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I was already home. I'd been home for an hour, the groceries put away, the mail sorted, the oven preheating. My husband, Mark, was upstairs in his office, probably lost in spreadsheets and quarterly reports. The house was quiet, safe. It was our sanctuary. I lowered the phone, my hand shaking so hard the screen blurred. A prank. It had to be a vicious, stupid prank. But who and how? My number wasn't public. My circle was small. I tried to reason with the panic clawing at my throat. Spoofing apps could mimic any number. It was a random, cruel coincidence. But the voice knew my name. I took a deep, shuddering breath and forced myself to move. I walked to the bottom of the stairs, my feet leaden. "Mark," I called out, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. His voice floated down, distracted but warm. "Yeah, honey, everything okay?" How could I even begin to explain? My own voice just called me and told me not to come to the place where I already am. I would sound insane. "Dinner's almost ready," I said instead, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. I went back to the kitchen and leaned against the counter, my gaze sweeping over the familiar room. The cheerful yellow walls, the pot of basil on the windowsill, the crayon drawing from our niece, Maya, stuck to the fridge with a magnet. It was all so normal, so aggressively, stubbornly mundane. And yet, the space now felt alien. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, the silence between the hum of the refrigerator more profound. The warning from the phone replayed in my head. "Don't go back to the house." A floorboard creaked upstairs. It was just Mark, shifting in his chair, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times. Tonight, it made me flinch. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to grab my purse and run, to obey the disembodied command of my own voice. But where would I go? And what would I be running from? Just then, headlights swept across the kitchen window, followed by the crunch of tires on our gravel driveway. My sister, Lena, was early. She was supposed to come for dinner, a weekly ritual we'd cherished since our mother passed away 2 years ago. Usually, her arrival was a comfort. Tonight, it felt like an intrusion. I watched her get out of the car, a slim silhouette against the deepening twilight. She had a bottle of wine in one hand and her usual bright, slightly strained smile on her face. As she walked toward the door, I felt a new wave of unease, this one sharper and more specific. Lena had been different lately, more attentive, almost cloyingly so. She called multiple times a day just to check in. She offered to run errands I hadn't asked her to run. At first, I'd been touched, assuming she was just lonely. But her questions had become more pointed, more probing. Questions about Mark's work schedule, our travel plans, the security system I'd had installed last year. I'd brushed it off as her typical anxious nature, but now in the eerie silence left by that impossible phone call, her solicitousness felt less like care and more like surveillance. The doorbell chimed, a cheerful two-note sound that made my teeth ache. I plastered a smile on my face and walked to the door, my body feeling like a poorly operated puppet. When I opened it, Lena's smile widened. "Hey you," she said, stepping in for a hug. Her embrace was tight, her perfume, a cloying gardenia scent, filling my senses. As I hugged her back, my cheek pressed against her hair. I couldn't shake the chilling thought that had taken root in my mind. The voice on the phone. It was my voice, yes, but the slight, almost imperceptible lisp on the S in the word house. It wasn't mine. It was Lena's. I pulled away from the hug, my smile feeling brittle enough to crack. "You're early," I said, my voice a stranger's in my own ears. Lena's eyes, a shade of blue so like my own, scanned my face with an intensity that felt more like an assessment than sisterly concern. "Just eager for your famous roasted chicken, and I wanted to beat the traffic." She held up the bottle of Chardonnay, a peace offering for an undeclared war. "Thought we could use this." I took it from her, my fingers brushing against hers. Her skin was cold. I led her into the kitchen, the air thick with the performance of normalcy. She chattered on about her day, a difficult client at the design firm, a funny thing she saw on the subway. Her words a smooth, practiced stream designed to fill the silence. I moved around the kitchen on autopilot, pulling plates from the cupboard, tossing the salad, my mind a maelstrom of fear and confusion. Was I imagining it? Was grief and stress finally making me unravel? The lisp, it was so subtle. The kind of thing you'd only notice if you'd grown up listening to that voice your entire life, correcting it during childhood speech therapy sessions. Lena had mostly grown out of it, but it still surfaced when she was tired or stressed. "Don't go back to the house." I replayed the word in my head, the sound of it now inseparable from the image of my sister's smiling face. Mark came downstairs then, his presence a welcome anchor in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. He kissed my cheek and gave Lena a warm hug. "Smells amazing, Clara. Hey Lena, how's it going?" "Surviving," she said with a dramatic sigh, "but much better now that I'm here." They launched into an easy conversation about Mark's work, and I watched them from the corner of my eye, feeling strangely detached, like I was observing a scene from someone else's life. Lena was so good at this. She was charming, witty, empathetic. She leaned forward when Mark spoke, her expression one of rapt attention. She was the perfect sister, the perfect guest. But under the polished surface, I could now see the fine cracks in her performance. The way her eyes flickered toward my phone sitting on the counter, the slight tension in her jaw, when I didn't immediately join the conversation. The way she subtly steered the topic toward our finances, disguised as a casual question about the cost of our recent vacation. "That trip to Italy looked incredible," she said, her voice laced with a wistful envy she barely tried to conceal. "Must have cost a fortune. You two are so lucky Mark's company is doing well." It was a familiar refrain. For the past year since her divorce and the subsequent financial strain, every conversation had eventually circled back to money. Our money. The life she felt she was owed, the one that had been snatched away from her. I had offered to help, of course, loaning her money she never paid back, paying for her car repairs, letting her use our credit card for groceries. I thought I was being a good sister. Now I wondered if I was just funding my own destruction. The oven timer beeped, a shrill interruption that made me jump. I pulled the chicken out, the heat a welcome, grounding sensation on my face. As I set the roasting pan on the stove, Lena came to stand beside me, her hip brushing against mine. "Need a hand with anything?" she asked, her voice low and conspiratorial, as if we were the only two people in the room. I could feel the heat radiating from her body, a suffocating proximity. My instincts screamed at me to step away, to put distance between us. "No, I've got it," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She recoiled slightly, a flicker of surprise, or perhaps annoyance in her eyes, before it was replaced by a look of wounded concern. "Clara, are you okay? You seem a little on edge tonight." Mark looked over from the dining table where he was setting the plates. "She does, doesn't she? Long day at the hospital?" I was a nurse practitioner, a job that was often stressful, and it made for a convenient excuse. "Something like that," I mumbled, turning my back to them to carve the chicken. My hands were shaking again. I focused on the task, the rhythmic slide of the knife through the tender meat. I had to get through this dinner. I had to act normal. I had to figure out what was happening without letting her know that I knew. Or what I suspected, because what did I really know? I had a one-sentence phone call from a spoofed number and a faint, possibly imagined lisp. It wasn't evidence, it was paranoia. After dinner, as I was clearing the plates, I noticed my phone was no longer on the kitchen counter. A cold dread washed over me. I'd left it right there, next to the fruit bowl. I scanned the room, my heart starting to pound again. "Has anyone seen my phone?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Mark shook his head. "Didn't you have it in here?" Lena looked up from the couch, her expression a perfect mask of innocence. "Oh, it was buzzing on the counter, so I put it in your purse for you. Didn't want it to get splashed." She gestured toward the hallway where my bag hung on a hook. The explanation was perfectly reasonable, helpful even, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that she had taken it. While Mark and I were distracted by the meal, she had picked it up. What was she looking for? My call history? Had she deleted the record of the call from my own number? I walked to the hallway, my movements stiff. I reached into my purse, and there it was, nestled next to my wallet. I unlocked it, my fingers fumbling with the passcode. I went straight to my recent calls. The list was there: Mark, the hospital, my gym. But the top entry, the one from my own number that had come in just before Lena arrived, was gone. The absence of the call was more terrifying than its presence had been. It was proof. Not just that the call had happened, but that someone had a vested interest in erasing it. And that someone was currently sitting on my living room couch, sipping my wine. acting for all the world like my loving, harmless sister. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just a prank. It wasn't a glitch. This was a deliberate act. The call was a warning, and Lena was the threat. But why? What was she planning? The voice had said, "Don't go back to the house." It wasn't a warning to stay away for the night. It was a warning that something was going to happen here, in my home, a place I was supposed to be safe. And Lena had tried to erase the warning. She wanted me here, unsuspecting. I walked back into the living room, forcing my face into a neutral expression. Lena and Mark were laughing at something on TV. The sound felt obscene. I sat down in the armchair opposite them, clutching my phone in my lap like a talisman. I felt a profound sense of isolation, of being the only one in the room who understood the danger we were in. Mark was oblivious, his trust in my sister absolute. To him, she was family. To me, she had become a stranger, wearing a familiar face. "Everything okay?" Mark asked, noticing my silence. I nodded, unable to speak. I had to tell him, but how? How could I voice these suspicions without sounding like I was losing my mind? My sister is trying to hurt me. She faked a phone call from my own number to lure me into a trap, and then deleted the evidence. It sounded like the plot of a bad thriller. He would think I was overworked, that my imagination was running away with me. He would try to reason with me, to defend her, and in doing so, he would alert her. I had to be careful. I had to be smart. For the rest of the evening, I was a ghost in my own home. I floated through the motions of conversation, of cleaning up, of saying goodnight. When Lena finally stood to leave, she gave me another one of her tight, suffocating hugs. "Get some rest, Clara," she whispered in my ear, her breath warm against my skin. "You look exhausted. Don't worry about a thing." It wasn't a comfort. It was a command, a threat veiled in concern. I watched from the doorway as her taillights disappeared down the street. A knot of ice tightening in my stomach. The real danger wasn't out there in the dark. I had just locked it out. But I knew with a chilling certainty that it would be back. That night, I lay awake in bed long after Mark's breathing had settled into a deep, even rhythm. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside the window, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. I kept replaying the phone call, the deleted log, Lena's predatory concern. I started connecting dots I hadn't even realized were there. The odd questions about our security system's master code, which I, like an idiot, had shared with her in case of an emergency. Her helpful suggestion a few weeks ago that we get higher life insurance coverage, joking that we needed to protect each other. Her insistence on having a key to our house, a key that now felt like a weapon pointed at my back. I slipped out of bed and crept downstairs, the cold wood floor chilling my bare feet. In the sterile glow of the refrigerator light, I pulled up my online banking app. I scrolled through my recent transactions, my heart hammering against my ribs. It all looked normal at first glance: mortgage payment, utility bills, groceries. But then I saw it. A small charge from a store I'd never heard of. Secure Storage Solutions. It was for $29.99, a monthly fee. I clicked on the transaction details. The charge had first appeared 3 months ago. 3 months. The same time Lena's behavior had started to change, when her attentiveness had tipped over into something obsessive. It wasn't just about money, it was about something bigger, something more methodical. She was planning. I went to my laptop and did a quick search for the storage company. It was a 24-hour facility in an industrial park on the other side of town, a bleak, anonymous place. What was she storing? Why was she using my account to pay for it? 1,000 possibilities, each more terrifying than the last, flooded my mind. Was she siphoning off my possessions, forging documents, or was she building something? A new life, perhaps? A life built on the foundation of mine. The pieces were starting to come together, forming a picture so monstrous I could barely look at it. The phone call wasn't just a warning. It was a message from someone who knew Lena's plan. But who? Who would know the details of her deception and try to save me? The voice had been mine, but the lisp had been hers. It didn't make sense. Unless the voice wasn't a perfect imitation, unless it was a technological fabrication. AI voice cloning. I'd read articles about it, how software could replicate a person's voice with just a few seconds of audio. Lena was a graphic designer, tech-savvy. She could have easily recorded my voice from a voicemail or a video call. She could have synthesized that message. But if Lena had created the warning, why would she then try to erase it? It was a contradiction that made my head spin. Maybe she hadn't sent it. Maybe someone else had, using a recording of her voice that they then morphed into mine. Or maybe, and this thought was the most terrifying of all, Lena herself was of two minds. A part of her, the sister I grew up with, was horrified by what the other part was doing. A flicker of conscience in a sea of malice. No, that was wishful thinking. That was the desperate hope that the sister I loved still existed somewhere, inside the cold, calculating stranger she had become. The simplest explanation was often the correct one. The call was from an unknown third party, a co-conspirator perhaps, who had gotten cold feet. Or it was a mistake on Lena's part, a misfired part of her plan. Whatever the origin, the message was clear. My home was not safe, and my sister was the reason why. I knew then that I couldn't just wait for her next move. I had to act. I had to find out what was in that storage unit. I had to gather proof that would be more substantial than a deleted phone call and a vague sense of dread. Because no one, not even Mark, would believe the truth until I could hold it in my hands. And I had a sinking feeling that my life depended on it. The next morning, I woke with a phantom weight on my chest, the residue of a night spent staring into the darkness. Mark was already dressed, knotting his tie in front of the mirror. He smiled at my reflection. "Morning, sleepyhead. You were tossing and turning all night." I sat up, the flimsy excuse of a bad dream already on my lips. Just a stressful week. He came over and kissed my forehead, his lips warm against my cool skin. "Why don't you take a sick day? Just relax, watch some movies. You deserve it." His concern was so genuine, so pure, it felt like a physical blow. He had no idea of the danger that was coiling around us, a danger I had invited into our home. But his suggestion was a gift, a day off, a day to investigate without arousing suspicion. "Maybe I will," I said, forcing a weary smile. "That actually sounds perfect." As soon as I heard his car pull out of the driveway, I was in motion. The first step was the storage unit. Getting in would be the problem. The account was in my name, but Lena would have the key, the gate code. Calling the company and claiming I'd lost them was an option, but it was risky. They would ask for ID, and if Lena had already been there and established herself as me, it could backfire, alerting her immediately. I needed another way. I found the company's website again. They boasted about their state-of-the-art security. But like most places, their customer service was their weak point. I found a live chat feature and opened it. Adopting a persona of a flustered, slightly incompetent person, I began typing, "Hi, this is Clara Miller, Unit 3B. I am so embarrassed, but I seem to have lost my gate code and I have movers coming in an hour. Is there any way you can help?" The response was a predictable, automated message about security protocols. I persisted, layering on the fabricated panic. "I understand, but it's an emergency. My mother-in-law is in the hospital. We're moving her things into storage today. I have my ID, my credit card statement showing the payments, everything. I'm just so stressed I can't think straight. I was banking on the universal desire of customer service reps to get a difficult person off their hands as quickly as possible." After a few more exchanges and a feigned burst of tears via text, the representative caved. A temporary code was issued, valid for 2 hours. It felt like a small, dirty victory. I threw on a pair of jeans and a nondescript sweatshirt, pulling my hair back into a messy bun and adding a pair of sunglasses. I wanted to be as unmemorable as possible. The drive to the storage facility was a 20-minute journey into a part of town I rarely visited. Warehouses and industrial lots stretched out under a gray, indifferent sky. The facility itself was a massive, soulless place, rows upon rows of identical orange doors baking in the sun. I punched in the temporary code at the gate, my heart pounding. The gate slid open with a low groan. I drove through the maze of buildings until I found 3B. It was a small 5x10 unit, tucked away in a poorly lit corner. I got out of the car, a set of bolt cutters I'd bought from the hardware store heavy in my bag. The lock on the unit was a heavy-duty padlock. There was no way I was getting through it without making a scene. I stood there for a moment, defeated, but then I looked closer at the latch mechanism. It was a standard roll-up door, and on the side, near the bottom, was a small emergency release latch, the kind you're supposed to be able to pull from the inside if you get trapped. It was covered by a small metal plate, held in place by 2 simple screws. It was a long shot. I dug through my car's glove compartment and found a small multi-tool gadget Mark had given me for Christmas. The screwdriver bit was tiny, but it might work. My hands shook as I worked on the screws, scraping my knuckles against the corrugated metal door. The first screw came loose, then the second. I pried the plate off and reached inside, my fingers fumbling in the dark until they found a thin cord. I pulled. With a loud clank, the locking mechanism disengaged. I held my breath, waiting for an alarm to sound, but the facility was silent except for the distant hum of traffic. I lifted the door, my muscles straining. It rose with a deafening screech of rusty metal. I peered into the darkness, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. The air inside was stale and smelled of dust and plastic. The unit wasn't full. In fact, it was sparsely populated with objects that made no sense together. There were several large, empty suitcases stacked against one wall. Next to them were boxes of what looked like new clothes, all in my size and my preferred style, simple, classic pieces. There was a box of toiletries, all my favorite brands, a new laptop still in its box. It was a starter kit for a new life, my life. But then I saw what was on the small table in the back, a stack of documents. I stepped inside, using my phone's flashlight to illuminate the space. The papers were a chilling collection of my identity. my birth certificate, my social security card, my passport, not copies, the originals. I felt a wave of nausea. I had a file at home where I kept these things, a fireproof box in the back of my closet. I had checked it just last month. She must have taken them piece by piece over weeks, so I wouldn't notice they were all gone at once. Beneath the documents was a large, leather-bound folder. I opened it. Inside were bank statements, not for my accounts, but for new accounts opened in my name at a different bank. Accounts I knew nothing about. They had been systematically funded by small regular transfers from my and Mark's joint savings, disguised as payments to vague-sounding entities like Financial Services Group or Investment Holdings. The amounts were small enough not to trigger any alerts, a few $100s here and there. A death by 1,000 cuts. Over the past 6 months, she had drained nearly $50,000 from us. But the money was just the beginning. The next set of documents made my blood run cold. It was a life insurance application, a new policy for me, for $2 million. The beneficiary was listed as Mark, but there was a secondary, contingent beneficiary listed in case of the primary's demise. It was Lena. The application was pending, waiting on a final medical sign-off, and tucked into the back of the folder was a single, terrifying sheet of paper. It was a printout from a chemical supply website, a receipt for the purchase of a small vial of digoxin, a powerful heart medication. In high doses, it was lethal. It could induce a massive, untraceable heart attack. The cause of death would look natural, especially for a woman in her 40s under a lot of stress. A hard-working nurse practitioner, perhaps. The plan was laid out before me in black and white, a meticulous, cold-blooded blueprint for my own erasure. She wasn't just trying to steal my money, she was going to steal my life, and then, when the time was right, she was going to end it. Mark would be devastated. He would lean on my loving, supportive sister in his grief. And eventually, after a suitable period of mourning, who knew what would happen? Maybe another tragic accident would befall the grieving widower, and my dear sister would inherit everything. I felt the air leave my lungs. I stumbled back out of the storage unit, gasping, the concrete rough beneath my hands. The world tilted on its axis. This was real. This was happening. My own sister, the girl I had shared a bedroom with, the woman who was my maid of honor, was planning to murder me. The phone call, the voice, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Don't go back to the house. It wasn't a warning about that night. It was a warning about the future. A future where Lena's plan came to fruition. But who sent it? And why would they use a synthesized voice, a strange hybrid of mine and Lena's? It had to be someone who knew, someone who couldn't speak directly. I slammed the storage unit door shut, the sound echoing in the silence. I didn't bother trying to fix the latch. Let her see it. Let her know that I knew. The game had changed. I was no longer the unsuspecting victim. I was the hunter. I drove home in a daze, the damning evidence photographed on my phone and the originals tucked safely in my bag. I had the proof, but what was my next step? If I went to the police, it would be my word against hers. She would deny everything. She would say I was unstable, that I was framing her. She was a master manipulator. She could twist the narrative, paint me as the villain. I needed more. I needed something undeniable. I needed her to confess. And I knew with a sickening certainty that to get it, I would have to walk willingly into the trap she had set for me. When I got home, the house felt different. No longer a potential crime scene, but a chessboard. Every object, every room, was now a piece in a game I didn't know I'd been playing. I put the original documents from the storage unit into my own fireproof safe, a place I knew Lena couldn't access, and hid the key. I spent the rest of the day meticulously cleaning my house, not out of a need for order, but as a form of forensic preparation. I wiped down surfaces, noting every item that seemed out of place, every object Lena might have touched during her last visit. I was searching for something, anything that might give me an edge. I found it in the kitchen trash. Tucked deep beneath coffee grounds and vegetable peels was a small, empty blister pack, the kind that holds pills. There was no label. It was just a small piece of foil and plastic she must have discarded when she thought I wasn't looking. Was this it? A trial run? Had she tried to drug me during dinner? My mind reeled. The wine she brought, the salad dressing she insisted on mixing herself. The opportunities had been endless. I felt a phantom bitterness in my mouth, wondering if a dose of something was already in my system, a prelude to the main event. The thought spurred me to action. I needed a plan, a way to control the narrative, to force her hand on my terms. My mind raced, piecing together a strategy born of desperation and a primal will to survive. The life insurance policy was the key. It was pending a medical sign-off. That meant she needed me healthy and cooperative, at least for a little while longer. The digoxin was for the final act. She wouldn't use it until the policy was approved and active. This gave me a window of time. But how to get a confession? Lena was too smart, too cautious to admit to anything directly. I couldn't just confront her. I had to create a scenario where she felt so in control, so confident of her success, that she would let her guard down. And then I remembered the lake house. Our family's old cabin, a 2-hour drive north, nestled in a remote patch of woods on the edge of a deep, cold lake. It was our childhood sanctuary, a place of happy memories. It was also completely isolated. No cell service, no nosy neighbors. It was the perfect place to stage an accident. A tragic fall on the hiking trails, a boating mishap, drowning. The possibilities were endless. She had mentioned it just last week, a wistful suggestion. We should go up to the lake house for a weekend, just the two of us, like old times, get away from it all. At the time, I thought it was a sweet idea. Now I understood it for what it was, an invitation to my own murder, and I was going to accept. I called Mark, my voice trembling but resolute. I told him everything. I laid out the impossible, horrifying truth, my words tumbling over each other in my haste. I told him about the phone call, the deleted log, the storage unit, the documents, the poison. I expected disbelief, arguments, a defense of his sister-in-law. But he was silent. For a long, terrifying moment, I thought I had lost him, that the story was too monstrous for him to believe. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and tight with a fury I had never heard before. "I'm coming home," he said. "Don't do anything until I get there." When he walked through the door an hour later, his face was pale, his eyes hard. I showed him the pictures on my phone. He sank onto the couch, his head in his hands, as the reality of my sister's betrayal washed over him. There was no denial, only a deep, shuddering grief for the woman he thought he knew, and a fierce, protective rage on my behalf. "We're going to the police," he said, his voice raw. Right now. No, I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. Not yet. She'll talk her way out of it. She'll say I planted the evidence. We need more, Mark. We need to catch her in the act. He looked at me, his eyes wide with fear. Clara, no. That's insane. It's too dangerous. It's the only way, I insisted, kneeling in front of him. She wants me to go to the lake house with her. She thinks I'm the same trusting, naive little sister I've always been. We can use that. We can set a trap of our own. The plan I outlined for him was risky, bordering on reckless, but it was the only path I could see. We would go to the police, but not to file a report. We would go to one specific detective, a man named Erickson, a friend of Mark's father who was known for being smart and discreet. We would tell him everything and ask for his off-the-books help. We needed a wire. We needed surveillance. We needed a safety net for when things went wrong. And I would go to the lake house with Lena. I would be the bait. Mark fought me on it for hours. He paced the living room, running his hands through his hair, his face a mask of anguish. The thought of putting me in that kind of danger was tearing him apart. But I was relentless. I knew Lena. I knew her pride, her arrogance. She believed she was smarter than everyone else. That was her weakness. And it was the only weakness I could exploit. By midnight, he had reluctantly agreed. His agreement was conditional. He and Detective Erickson would be nearby, listening to everything, ready to move in at a moment's notice. I would have a panic word. The moment I said it, they would storm the place. The next day was a blur of covert activity. We met with Erickson in a quiet coffee shop. He was a tall, stoic man with weary eyes that had seen the worst of human nature. He listened to my story without interruption, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, he simply nodded. "Your sister is a special kind of evil," he said, his voice a low gravel. "The kind that hides behind a smile. They're the hardest to catch and the most dangerous." He agreed to help. The risks were huge, both professionally and physically, but he saw the necessity. He provided me with a recording device, so small it was almost invisible, disguised as a pendant on a simple silver necklace. The microphone was powerful, the battery life long. He also gave me a tiny GPS tracker to slip into my bag. "My partner and I will be in a cabin a mile down the road," he said, his gaze locked on mine. "We'll have a live feed of the audio. The second you say the panic word, sunflower, your mother's favorite flower, you told me, we're coming in. Don't be a hero, Clara. Your only job is to stay alive and get her to talk." I spent the rest of the day preparing for the trip, my movements calm and deliberate on the outside, my insides a knot of terror. I called Lena, my voice bright and cheerful. "You'll never guess what," I said. "Mark has a last-minute business trip this weekend, and I was thinking your idea about the lake house was brilliant. Are you free, just us girls?" There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line, and in that moment I could almost hear the cogs of her treacherous mind turning. Then her voice came, dripping with false sympathy and delight. "Oh, Clara, that's perfect. I'd love to. I'm so sorry Mark has to work, but it will be so good for us to have some sister time." The trap was set. The bait was taken. As I packed my overnight bag, my hands moved with a strange sense of detachment. I packed a sweater, a toothbrush, a book I would never read. And at the bottom of the bag, I placed the small, heavy weight of the bolt cutters from my car. I didn't know why. It was an irrational impulse. a primitive need for a weapon. As I zipped the bag shut, I caught my reflection in the closet mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide and dark. I looked like a stranger, a woman on the verge of either saving her own life or walking directly into her grave. The fear was a living thing inside me, cold and heavy. But beneath it, there was something else, a hard, unyielding core of resolve. She had underestimated me. She saw me as weak, as pliable, as a stepping stone to the life she coveted. She was about to find out how wrong she was. The drive to the lake house was a masterclass in deception. Lena was in the passenger seat, radiating a triumphant warmth that was almost palpable. She played the part of the doting sister to perfection, keeping up a steady stream of light-hearted chatter, reminiscing about our childhood summers at the lake, the silly songs we used to sing, the secrets we used to share. It was a calculated performance designed to lull me into a state of nostalgic security, and it was so expertly done that for moments at a time, I almost forgot the cold reality of her intentions. I played my own part, laughing at her jokes, adding my own embellished memories to the conversation, my voice a carefully constructed imitation of my normal self. But beneath the surface, my senses were on high alert. I was aware of every subtle shift in her tone, every flicker of her eyes. Around my neck, the pendant felt both heavy and reassuring, a silent witness to her betrayal. Every few minutes, my hand would instinctively brush against it. A physical check to ensure our lifeline was still active. I could only pray that Mark and Erickson were listening, that the signal was strong enough to penetrate the increasingly remote landscape. The city gave way to suburbs, then to rolling farmland, and finally to the dense, dark woods that surrounded the lake. The paved road turned to gravel, and my phone, as expected, lost its last bar of service. We were officially cut off. A new layer of fear, cold and sharp, settled over me. I was completely reliant on the tiny piece of technology hidden on my body. When we finally pulled up to the cabin, it looked just as I remembered it from my childhood, yet different. The familiar weathered wood siding and the wide, welcoming porch were still there, but the memories they held were now tainted, overlaid with a sinister new meaning. The towering pine trees that surrounded the cabin no longer felt protective. They felt like silent, indifferent sentinels. The quiet of the woods was not peaceful. It was an oppressive, listening silence. We got out of the car, and Lena took a deep, theatrical breath. "Ah, smell that air," she said, her smile wide and predatory. "Nothing like it, so pure." We carried our bags inside. The cabin was just as we'd left it last fall, a little dusty, smelling faintly of pine and wood smoke. Lena immediately set about making us feel at home. She built a fire in the stone fireplace, her movements efficient and confident. She unpacked the groceries she'd brought, a selection of my favorite foods, my favorite wine. Every gesture was a carefully curated act of love, and every act was a lie. "You just sit and relax," she said, bustling around the small kitchen. "I'll take care of everything. You deserve a break." I sat on the worn floral sofa, a book open in my lap, pretending to read. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I watched her as she moved, her familiar form casting long, dancing shadows in the firelight. This was her stage, and she was in full command. She was preparing dinner, humming a tune from our childhood. In her hands, a kitchen knife looked menacing. The wine she was pouring looked like poison. I had to stay calm. I had to wait for the right moment. I had to guide the conversation toward the subjects that would make her reveal herself. The plan was to start with the money. It was the most logical, least confrontational entry point. After dinner, as we sat by the fire, nursing our glasses of wine, I had made a point of pouring my own. I took a deep breath and began. "Lena," I said, my voice carefully modulated to sound weary and confessional. "I have to be honest, I've been so worried about you lately, with your finances and everything." Her expression shifted instantly from warmth to a practiced look of wounded pride. "I'm fine, Clara. I've told you, I'm managing." "I know, but I saw some strange things on our bank statements," I said, letting my voice trail off as if I were reluctant to continue. "Some payments to a company I didn't recognize. It's been happening for months." I watched her face. For a split second, a flicker of pure cold panic crossed her features before she masked it with confusion. "What are you talking about? What company?" She was a brilliant actress. Her denial was flawless. "I don't know," I said, feigning helplessness. "I was going to call the bank. I was worried we'd been hacked." This was the first test. By offering her the out, an anonymous hacker, I was giving her a chance to steer the narrative, to help me solve the problem she had created. Her reaction would tell me everything. She seized the opportunity immediately. Her face filled with alarm. "Hacked? Oh, Clara, that's awful. You absolutely should call the bank. We need to get that sorted out right away. People can be so horrible." She stood up and began to pace in front of the fireplace, a perfect picture of righteous indignation. "They could drain your accounts, ruin your credit. They could steal your whole identity." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. She was laying the groundwork, building the very narrative she would need later to explain the chaos she had created in my life. The anonymous, faceless hacker would be the perfect scapegoat for everything she had done and was planning to do. I pressed on, gently pushing her toward the next part of the script. "It's just so strange," I said, shaking my head. "They even got into my personal files. My passport is gone, my birth certificate. It's a nightmare." Lena stopped pacing and knelt in front of me, her eyes wide with manufactured sympathy. She took my hands in hers. Her skin was still so cold. "Oh, honey, this is serious. We have to be so careful. A person could do anything with that information. They could apply for loans, insurance. They could build a whole new life." She was feeding me the lines, practically confessing through her performance of concern. She was so confident in my ignorance, so sure of her own cleverness, that she was walking directly into my trap. Every word she spoke was being recorded, every feigned expression of sympathy a nail in her own coffin. I felt a surge of cold, clear power. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was being eclipsed by a focused, diamond-hard resolve. She thought she was the director of this little play, but she was just an actor. And I was about to change the script. I knew the next step was to escalate, to move from the abstract threat of a hacker to the concrete reality of her actions. I needed to bring up the storage unit, but I had to do it in a way that didn't immediately reveal my hand. I needed to make her think I had stumbled upon it by accident, a product of my own bumbling investigation into the hacker. The fire crackled, filling the silence. The moment was ripe. I took another sip of wine, steeling myself for the next phase. The weirdest thing, I began, my voice a delicate mixture of confusion and distress, is that the bank was able to trace one of the payments, the ones for that holding company. It went to a storage facility on the other side of town. I let the statement hang in the air, watching her face in the flickering firelight. The mask of concern didn't slip, but I saw a new stillness in her, a sharpening of her attention. She was processing this new information, calculating its potential impact on her plan. A storage facility? She repeated, her voice carefully neutral. Why would a hacker need a storage facility? I have no idea, I said, shaking my head as if baffled. I leaned forward, lowering my voice conspiratorially. I was so freaked out, I actually drove by there this morning. I know it sounds crazy. She didn't move. Her body was perfectly still, but I could feel the tension radiating from her. And, she prompted, her voice tight. And I saw your car, I said, the lie delivered with a note of pure, heartbroken bewilderment. It was parked right outside. I don't understand, Lena. What were you doing there? What's going on? The direct accusation, softened by the guise of confusion, hit her like a physical blow. Her face, for the first time that night, went completely blank. The actress was gone, and in her place was the cold, calculating strategist, her mind racing to formulate a response. I could see the denial forming on her lips, the angry, wounded retort that would accuse me of spying on her, of being paranoid. But I didn't give her the chance. I pressed my advantage, my voice now trembling with expertly feigned tears. I thought we were in this together. I thought you were helping me, but you were there, at the place the hacker is using. Are you involved in this? I let my voice break on the last words, burying my face in my hands. A perfect portrait of a sister betrayed and bewildered. It was a gamble. I was forcing her to create a new lie on the spot, a lie that would have to be more complex, more elaborate than her simple hacker narrative. A lie that would, with any luck, entangle her further in her own web of deceit. She was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, laced with a deep, sorrowful resignation. "Oh, Clara," she sighed, the sound full of pity. "I didn't want you to find out this way. I was trying to protect you." I looked up, my face streaked with fake tears, my expression a mask of confusion. "Protect me? From what? What are you talking about?" She moved from her chair to sit beside me on the sofa, draping a comforting arm around my shoulder. Her touch felt like a brand. "I didn't want to worry you," she said, her voice a low, soothing murmur. "But I've been so concerned. You haven't been yourself lately. You're forgetful, you're anxious. You've been misplacing things, making strange, financial decisions you don't remember." It was a breathtakingly audacious move. She was gaslighting me, using my own feigned vulnerability as evidence of my mental instability. She was turning my own strategy back on me. "That's not true," I whispered, allowing a note of panicked uncertainty into my voice. "Yes, it is, honey," she said, her tone full of gentle pity. "Remember last month when you thought you'd lost your passport? I found it for you, tucked away in a cookbook. You've been making these mistakes, so when I saw those strange payments, I got scared. I did some digging on my own. I followed the trail to that storage unit. I was trying to figure out what was happening, who was taking advantage of you before it got any worse." She had built an entirely new narrative in seconds. In this version, she was the hero, the protective older sister cleaning up my messes, shielding me from a world I was no longer equipped to handle. And in this version, I was unwell, unstable, unreliable. A woman whose memories and perceptions could not be trusted. It was brilliant, it was diabolical, and it was exactly what I needed. Every word she spoke was a confession of her actions, twisted to fit her new story. She was admitting to accessing my finances, to visiting the storage unit, to being involved. She was just reframing her motive from malice to love. "So what was in the unit?" I asked, my voice small and childlike. "Why did you have my documents?" She sighed again, a long, weary sound of a martyr bearing a heavy burden. "I moved them there for safekeeping," she said, "along with some other things. I was worried you might lose them, or that this person who has access to your accounts might get their hands on them. I was going to give them all back to you as soon as I figured out who was behind this. I was going to solve it all, and you would never have had to worry." The final piece of her story clicked into place. The life insurance policy, the digoxin. In this narrative, they would have a place too. The insurance was a responsible step I'd forgotten I'd taken. The poison. Well, if I were to have a tragic accident, a heart attack brought on by my fragile mental state, who would question it? Especially when my loving, worried sister could produce a mountain of evidence showing how she had tried so hard to save me from myself. She was creating the perfect crime, not just the murder itself, but the story that would surround it, a story that would leave her blameless and me a tragic figure of mental decay. My entire life, my reputation, my very sanity was being rewritten to serve as the prologue to my death. A cold, hard anger began to burn through the fear. She wasn't just going to kill me, she was going to erase the person I was, replacing me with a pathetic, unstable caricature. She was going to steal my life and my legacy. I had to end this. I had to push her to the final revelation. "What about the insurance, Lena?" I asked, my voice suddenly clear and steady. The shift in my tone was subtle, but she noticed it. Her arm tensed around my shoulder. "What are you talking about?" "The new life insurance policy," I said, looking her directly in the eye. The firelight danced in her pupils, revealing nothing. "The one for $2 million. Was that for my protection, too?" Her face hardened. The mask of gentle concern evaporated, replaced by a flat, cold watchfulness. The performance was over. "You have been busy, haven't you?" she said, her voice losing its soft, feigned sympathy. She removed her arm from my shoulder, creating a physical and emotional distance between us. "I told you, Clara, you've been doing things you don't remember." "I remember this," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I also remember a receipt for a chemical called digoxin, a heart medication. Funny, I don't have a heart condition. Do you, Lena?" The name of the poison hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. Her face, which had been a canvas for so many expertly crafted emotions, was now a stone mask. The game was up. She knew that I knew everything. Her eyes, so like my own, were now the eyes of a stranger, cold and reptilian. She stood up and walked over to the fireplace, picking up the iron poker, her knuckles white as she gripped the handle. "You were never supposed to be this smart," she said, her voice a soft, venomous whisper. "You were always the good one, the trusting one. It was your most pathetic quality, and your most useful." She turned to face me, the poker held loosely at her side. It wasn't an immediate threat, but a promise of one. "But you just couldn't leave it alone, could you? You had to go digging. You ruined it. You ruined everything." The confession was not what I had expected. It was not a tearful breakdown or a desperate justification. It was a cold, bitter statement of fact, a complaint, as if I were the one who had wronged her by uncovering her plan to murder me. My heart was pounding, a wild, frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was the moment, the point of no return. She was cornered, and her only way out was through me. I needed to say the word. I needed to scream it, but my throat was tight with terror. Sunflower. The word was a fragile seed in the wasteland of my fear. "Why, Lena?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I needed to keep her talking. I needed to understand the depths of the hatred that had been festering behind her sisterly smile for years. And I needed to buy myself time for my heart to stop hammering against my sternum, time for my voice to work again. She laughed, a short, ugly sound utterly devoid of humor. "Why? You're really asking me, why? Look at you, Clara. You have everything. The perfect husband, the perfect house, the perfect career. You glide through life, and everything just falls into your lap. It always has. Do you have any idea what it's like to be me, to stand next to you, to be the shadow? The supportive sister, the reliable one, the one everyone feels sorry for after her loser husband leaves her with a mountain of debt." She took a step toward me, the firelight glinting off the iron poker. "I have worked twice as hard for half as much. I deserved this. I deserved your life, and I was going to take it. It was so easy. A little bit of poison, a tragic accident." "Everyone would have mourned poor," stressed Clara, "and I would have been there to comfort your grieving husband. I would have stepped into your shoes. They would have fit me perfectly." Her confession was a torrent of resentment, a lifetime of perceived slights and bitter envy pouring out of her. She wasn't just a killer motivated by greed. She was a woman consumed by a corrosive jealousy that had eaten away her soul, leaving nothing but a hollowed-out shell of ambition and rage. The tragedy was that I had never seen it. I had seen her struggles, her heartbreaks, and I had felt only love and a desire to help. I had been blind to the fact that my help was not a comfort to her, but an insult. My success was not an inspiration, but a constant, burning reminder of her own perceived failures. "So what now?" I asked, my voice shaking. I edged back on the sofa, trying to put more space between us. "You're just going to kill me now? Here?" "It's a little messier than I planned," she admitted, a flicker of annoyance on her face. She gestured around the cozy cabin with the poker. "I was hoping for something a little more subtle, a fall from the Widow's Peak Trail tomorrow morning. So tragic, so clumsy. But you've forced my hand." She took another step, and I scrambled off the couch, putting the coffee table between us. My mind was racing. Sunflower, say the word. But my tongue felt thick and useless in my mouth. Panic was a physical force, a vice squeezing my chest, stealing my breath. "It won't work, Lena," I said, my voice thin and reedy. "People know I'm here with you. Mark knows. Mark thinks you're having a lovely, relaxing weekend with your sister," she sneered. "By the time anyone realizes you're missing, I'll have a dozen witnesses who can attest to how worried I was about your fragile mental state. I'll be the one leading the search party, my face etched with grief and concern. They'll find your body at the bottom of a ravine, and everyone will shake their heads and talk about what a shame it was. No one will ever suspect a thing." She was so certain, so confident in her own narrative. She had planned for every contingency except one, me, the real me. Not the fragile, unstable caricature she had created, but the woman who was now fighting for her life. I backed away toward the kitchen, my eyes darting around the room, searching for a weapon, an escape route. The front door was too far. The windows were locked. The kitchen, knives. My mind latched onto the butcher block next to the stove, if I could just get to it. As if reading my mind, she smiled. "Don't even think about it, Clara. I know this house better than you do. There's no way out." She lunged, not with the poker, but with her body, moving with a surprising speed. She tackled me, and we went down hard, my head cracking against the slate floor by the hearth. Stars exploded behind my eyes, and the world went fuzzy for a second. The pendant. The fall must have dislodged it. I could feel the chain digging into my neck, the small, hard shape of the device pressed against my collarbone. Was it still working? I couldn't know. I couldn't rely on it. I had to save myself. Lena was on top of me, her knees digging into my ribs, her hands clawing at my throat. Her face was inches from mine, her expression twisted into a mask of pure, murderous fury. The scent of her gardenia perfume was suffocating. "You should have just stayed stupid," she hissed, her fingers tightening, cutting off my air. My lungs burned. Black spots danced in my vision. My hands flew to her wrists, trying to pry her fingers away. But she was strong, fueled by a terrifying, desperate rage. I was losing. My struggles grew weaker. My vision began to tunnel. And then I remembered the bolt cutters in my bag by the door. It was 1,000,000 miles away. I was going to die here, on the floor of my childhood sanctuary, at the hands of my own sister. My fingers, scrabbling uselessly at her hands, brushed against the necklace, the pendant, the microphone, sunflower. The word was a desperate, silent scream in my mind. My lips formed the shape, but no sound came out, just a choked, gurgling gasp. Her eyes were wide, triumphant. She was watching the life drain out of me. With the last ounce of my strength, born of pure animal terror, I bucked my hips, throwing her off balance for just a fraction of a second. It was enough. I twisted my body, and my hand, no longer pinned, shot out and grabbed the closest thing it could find on the hearth. The fireplace poker. The one she had been holding. It was heavy, solid iron. I swung it with all my might, a clumsy, desperate arc. It connected with the side of her head with a sickening thud. She cried out, a sharp, surprised sound, and her grip on my throat loosened. I scrambled away from her, crab-walking backward, gasping for air, my throat raw and burning. She was on the floor, dazed, her hand flying to her head. When she pulled it away, her fingers were slick with blood. The sight of her own blood seemed to enrage her further. The dazed look in her eyes was replaced by a renewed, incandescent fury. She staggered to her feet, her eyes locked on me. "You bitch!" she spat, her voice a low growl. She started toward me, and I knew I had only one chance. I got to my feet, the heavy poker still in my hand, and I ran. Not for the door, but for the back of the cabin, for the steep, narrow staircase that led to the sleeping loft. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my breath sobbing in my lungs. I could hear her right behind me, her footsteps heavy on the old wood. I reached the loft, a small, cramped space with a low ceiling and a single window overlooking the dark, silent lake. It was a dead end, a trap. She appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale and streaked with blood, her expression one of pure, feral hatred. There was nowhere left to run. "It's over, Clara," she said, her voice raspy. She took a step into the loft, and in that moment of final, absolute terror, my mind cleared. The panic receded, replaced by a strange, icy calm. The word, it wasn't a plea for help anymore. It was a trigger, a command. I looked her straight in the eye, and with a voice I didn't recognize as my own, clear and loud, and full of all the rage and betrayal she had caused, I said it. Sunflower. For a moment, nothing happened. The word hung in the claustrophobic silence of the loft, seemingly without effect. Lena's lips twisted into a cruel smile. "What was that?" she sneered. "Calling for Mommy? She can't help you now." She took another step toward me, and I braced myself, the poker held in front of me like a shield. My last, desperate gambit had failed. The wire was dead. Erickson and Mark weren't coming. I was alone, and then I heard it. A faint sound from outside, cutting through the thick silence of the woods. A shout, a man's voice. Lena heard it too. She froze, her head cocked, listening. The smile on her face faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then dawning horror. The sound came again, closer this time, the splintering crash of the cabin's front door being forced open. Heavy footsteps pounding across the floor below us. "Police, don't move!" Erickson's voice. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Lena's face crumpled. The fury, the confidence, the cold control. It all dissolved in an instant, replaced by the raw, naked panic of a cornered animal. Her eyes darted around the small loft, searching for an escape that didn't exist. She looked at the window, then back at the stairs, where the sounds of Erickson and his partner were getting closer. Her trap had become her cage. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not a monster, but the terrified, desperate woman she was. "Clara, please," she whimpered, her voice cracking. "You don't understand. I had to. They were going to take everything." The sudden shift from predator to victim was dizzying. A last-ditch effort at manipulation. But it was too late. The performance was over, and the audience had arrived. Erickson appeared at the top of the stairs, gun drawn, his partner right behind him. He took in the scene in a single sweeping glance. Me, pale and trembling, holding the poker. Lena, bleeding and cornered. "Drop the weapon, Lena," he said, his voice calm and authoritative, leaving no room for argument. Lena stared at him, her chest rising and falling in ragged, shallow breaths. For a second, I thought she might lunge for me, a final suicidal act of defiance. But the fight had gone out of her. The poker she had intended to use on me was now in my hand, and the power had shifted completely. With a choked sob, she sank to her knees, her hands covering her face. Mark was right behind the officers. He pushed past them and rushed to my side, his face a mess of terror and relief. He wrapped his arms around me, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. I dropped the poker, the iron clattering on the wood floor, and buried my face in his shoulder, the strength that had sustained me for the past 48 hours, finally giving way to a flood of shuddering, convulsive sobs. The rest of the night passed in a surreal, disjointed blur. Paramedics checked me over, their gentle hands and calm voices a stark contrast to the violence I had just survived. I watched, wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, as they led Lena away in handcuffs. She didn't look at me. Her face was a blank mask of shock, her eyes staring at nothing. She was a stranger, a ghost who had once inhabited the form of my sister. The cabin, once a place of cherished memories, was now a crime scene, cordoned off with a yellow tape. Its familiar warmth, violated by the cold, sterile procedures of law enforcement. Erickson sat with me at the small kitchen table, a tape recorder between us. I told him everything, my voice hoarse and shaky, the words tumbling out in a disorganized, emotional torrent. He listened patiently, his weary eyes full of a grim understanding. The pendant lay on the table, a small silver witness. "The entire confession is on here," he said, tapping the device. "Every word. She won't be able to talk her way out of this one." The drive home with Mark was silent. There were no words for the chasm that had opened up in our lives. The betrayal was too vast, the implications too horrifying. We simply held hands, his grip a firm, grounding presence in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. When we finally walked back into our own home, it felt like a sanctuary again. The danger was gone, but the ghosts remained. The following weeks were an ordeal. There were endless meetings with detectives, lawyers, prosecutors. The story of Lena's meticulous, cold-blooded plan came out in full, corroborated by the evidence from the storage unit and the chilling audio from the wire. The media got hold of the story, and our lives became a spectacle. "Sister's deadly betrayal," the headlines screamed. Our family was shattered. Our parents were gone, but the shockwaves ripped through our extended network of aunts, uncles, and cousins. Most of them couldn't believe it, couldn't reconcile the charming, witty Lena they knew with the monster depicted in the news reports. Some of them whispered that I must have driven her to it, that I must have misunderstood, that there had to be another side to the story. The gaslighting she had attempted in the cabin continued in her absence, a poison seeping into the foundations of my family. But Mark was my rock. He shielded me from the worst of it, his loyalty and love an unbreakable barrier. He never once doubted me, never once wavered in his support. He was the anchor that kept me from being swept away by the grief and the trauma. The question of the initial phone call remained a mystery. Erickson's tech team analyzed the audio. It was, as I suspected, a synthesized voice, an AI clone. But it wasn't a simple morph of my voice and Lena's. It was more complex. They found fragments of a third voice woven into the audio, a voice they couldn't identify. The call had been routed through a complex series of proxy servers, making it virtually untraceable. Erickson's theory was that Lena had a partner, a co-conspirator who got cold feet and tried to warn me without being identified. But Lena refused to talk, refused to give up anyone else. She maintained her innocence, clinging to the story she had fabricated in the cabin, that she was the hero and I was the unstable one who had attacked her in a paranoid rage. The trial was 6 months later. I had to testify. I had to sit in a courtroom and look at my sister, who sat there looking pale and thin in a prison jumpsuit, and recount every detail of her betrayal. I had to listen to her lawyer try to paint me as a liar, as a hysterical, vindictive woman trying to frame her innocent sister. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recording from the cabin was played for the jury, and the courtroom was silent as Lena's own voice, full of venom and resentment, detailed her plan to murder me. They heard her confess. They heard her attack me. They heard my terrified, choked gasps, and they heard me say the word that saved my life. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. The verdict was guilty. Attempted murder, fraud, identity theft, a life sentence. There was no victory in it, only a profound, bottomless sadness. As they led her away, her eyes finally met mine across the courtroom. There was no remorse in them, No flicker of the sister I once loved. Only a cold, empty hatred. It was the last time I ever saw her. Life is quiet now. We sold the house, the one she had tried to turn into a tomb for me. We moved to a new city, a place with no memories, no ghosts. We built a new life, a simpler one. But the scars remain. I still have nightmares. I still flinch when the phone rings with an unknown number. The trust I once gave so freely is now a guarded, precious thing. The world is no longer the safe, predictable place I once thought it was. But I am a survivor. I survived the sister who tried to erase me. I survived the woman who wore my face and spoke with my voice. And in the quiet moments when the fear recedes, I am left with a fierce, unyielding gratitude for the life I fought so hard to keep. And I often think about that first impossible phone call, the voice that was mine but not mine. I may never know for sure who sent it, what flicker of conscience in the darkness prompted that anonymous warning. But I know one thing. It was the sound of a truth I wasn't ready to hear, a truth that ultimately saved me. It was the echo of my own will to live, calling back to me from the future, a future my sister tried so desperately to steal. It was the first shot fired in a war for my own soul, and I won.